When we get to the yard, we're ready to do big things. From the job site to the ballpark, we come together and gear up with pride, ready to perfect our craft and dare to be great. Strauss High Performance Workwear is proud to partner with Major League Baseball, celebrating the preparation and dedication it takes to safely get the job done. Because whether you're on the field or in the field, your gear is a source of pride. Strauss and Major League Baseball. Gear up, go yard.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Back with us today is meteorologist Greg Soulje, and we're going to take a long-term look at the weather here. But first, Greg, kind of some exciting news. We have a sponsor for our weather segments, our monthly ones here that we do, as well as our midweek ones that we do twice a week.
Exactly. Nice to have the folks over at Strauss on board and partner with us here. And nice promo opening. They had, I believe, a picture of the old scoreboard there at Wrigley Field. I think the Cubs are within a game of getting into the playoffs. And Schwarber, the guy who was with the Cubs a few years ago, 50 home runs this year. So anyway, wow. Great montage of baseball and partnership with Major League Baseball. And here with us at feedstuffs365.com.
Yeah, and Strauss is one of the most trusted names in workwear. It's a family-owned since 1948 and makes gear that's tough, functional, and built to perform. If you want to learn more about Strauss, visit strauss.com. So, Greg, let's get into the weather. I know you've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about fall, and then we're going to even talk about a little bit of winter, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Rough draft number 2 will have the official copy and version of the winter outlook when we get together around the 15th of October. And very little change when we were looking over those maps and charts in the longer range. And we do it each week, by the way. That long range outlook goes 4 weeks in advance on This Week in Agribusiness every weekend. And so you get bits and pieces of that. And then with our updates Tuesday and Fridays here at feedstuffs365.com. So we've got you covered here right through the wintertime season. And it's harvest that's on everybody's mind, and crop maturity and dryness and drought. Those are kind of the headline stories. And we've got a new tropical storm in the Atlantic, Gabriel. So we'll talk all about that as we move forward here over the next 30 minutes or so.
Very good.
And here are some of the headlines, by the way, across the plains. So first of all, South Dakota leads the plains. 23% of their winter wheat crop has been planted, and just in the nick of time, rain has fallen across the Dakotas down through Nebraska. A fairly decent covering of half to as much as 1.5 inches worth of rain. There are still some dry, drought-ridden pockets, and we'll take a look at the drought monitor comparison from a month ago to one late last week and a Midwestern perspective as well. Otherwise, still lots of summertime in the tank, not only across the plains, livestock country, but across the Corn Belt too. So folks who were kind of faked out with that cool spell that we had about 10 days to 2 weeks ago, nothing fall like whatsoever the maps and charts of what should be kind of a milder to warmer to drier to warmer to wetter scenario as we get deeper on into harvest and the fall season across much of the heartland. And again, temperatures here for the middle part of the week and going forward, still with a modest cool down in the midst of rain, but generally going to continue above and actually well above seasonal norms. The showers are into sections of the western Corn Belt. Matter of fact, some pretty good rains in that I-35 corridor around Des Moines and Ames, back west of Boone, Iowa, for example, and southward into northwestern Missouri. And some of those folks out there may see an inch or two worth of rain. And again, we're very much early on into the harvest season, so this should not be of any great magnitude or problem. We are seeing some of the numbers on the Illinois side and the eastern Corn Belt and southern Corn Belt areas, especially beans, late planted beans. We're seeing a worsening of quality there. 23% of the beans rated poor and very poor here through the land of Lincoln compared to the national average. Everybody else, now we've got some leaf drop delay issues in South Dakota and Nebraska, but about 10-11% of that crop nationally is into the poor or very poor predicament. So it's parts of the southern Corn Belt, and especially through central and southern Illinois and western Indiana, the epicenter of ongoing dryness and drought. And some of those late planted varieties are certainly showing the indications of of the same. Otherwise, wet weather has been welcome down through central and south Florida. Our past few get-togethers, we've talked about dryness and drought in the Everglades, the I-4 corridor. That's sort of the central cusp of, at least north of there, of Florida citrus. So the rains have been appreciated. Meanwhile, the dryness and drought has been kind of teleconnecting and working its way northward into those central and southern Corn Belt locales. You get farther south into the Mid-South, including Kentucky and sections of Tennessee. And boy, it is just pasture lands are poor and very poor at 40, 50, almost 60% in that category. So a lot of the equine operations and livestock as well in that particular part of the country dealing with some of the issues regarding dryness and drought. And summertime continues on there. There's been an absence of any tropical systems, and probably the way it's going to go, I think. Just been doing this for a fair number of years. I just think this is going to come up to be a busted Atlantic Basin forecast this year from NOAA and anyone else who's kind of been jumped on board there. We'll see probably a ramping up here. Don't think it's going to be anything the numbers that were peddled back in May. Matter of fact, we have Tropical Storm Gabriel, but probably will just be a rainmaker with time in the next 5 to 7 days for coastal sections of the Mid-Atlantic region southward in through Florida. But the warmth pushing the back 40 double crop areas into maturity. So there's kind of a good and bad and ugly with the dryness and drought related issues in the Mississippi Delta, Mid-South, and the lower Mississippi Valley for those folks interested down there. Meanwhile, through the western states, fires have eased with a trough moving through the Pacific Northwest. We've had some shower activity. Matter of fact, unusually, you just don't get rain in summertime in Southern California. Now you may pop up a thunderstorm over the Sierra, maybe sometimes the Imperial Valley, but you don't get organized sprinkle and shower activity. And they've seen some of that as far north as LA down to San Diego. And that's some of the throwback tropical moisture from Mario. The tropics in the Pacific Basin continue to be unusually active in a so-called La Nina setup, and just from independent research in the office here, and just doesn't have the look and feel and the numbers, whether it's the Pacific, the Atlantic, the stratosphere, that we're really honestly into an El Nino setup. It's more or less still at least some semblance of a neutral state, maybe even still teetering into an El Nino setup. This talk of La Nina, very much premature, and we'll discuss that as we get into the longer range forecast. In any event, cotton, I should say, California's rice harvest is underway, so pretty good numbers there. Drought is the story across about all of the western states. That's the divide on westward, and leading the pack there is primarily Washington State, although they made some pretty good headway in their winter wheat planting operations. So going forward, when we do these live streams, these half-hour get-togethers, just like we've used this analogy before, if you're going to build an equipment shed, got to dig out the foundation, pour the foundation, put the studding in, and start building from bottom to top. And that's the way we kind of do forecasting around here. So in the short term, you can see some pretty good coverage rain across the Dakotas and through areas of the winter wheat belt, livestock country. Best coverage is Nebraska and parts of the Dakotas. And we'll get maybe a couple of showers as far east as about the Mississippi. Good coverage moisture with the sea breeze and Gulf breeze front across Florida. And that system that is in the mid-Atlantic region around the nation's capital. Air Force has sent a couple of planes into it. It doesn't have any tropical characteristics, although there have been some pretty good gales along coastal sections and inland some rain. And that rain is appreciated. There is another area of dryness and drought that we haven't really talked much about, and that is in the mid-Atlantic region, more so northward into the northeast and New England. And you can see some of the spotty scattered rains all the way to the coastline in central and southern California. Going forward here, as we move on through tonight and tomorrow, rains pick up in scope, coverage, and intensity. No widespread severe weather, probably just some soaking, percolating type rains in those fields. Also muddy feedlots, yes. Probably some harvest delays, yes. Probably a little slower on the bean side of things, yes. But the rain is appreciated and needed in some of those drier areas of the high plains, particularly across the Dakotas. The wet weather continues out across South Florida, mid-Atlantic region as well. And maybe a couple of showers and thunderstorms into parts of the northern Great Lakes region. And still some degree of overnight rainfall. And look at how the rains in Southern California all the way to Los Angeles and San Diego, and then into the southern Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Imperial Valleys. That is post-tropical cyclone cyclone Mario, enough to kick the Pacific moisture on northward. So kind of an unusual and seasonable setup of rainfall out there across California. And note the rain, too, across a good part of livestock country through Kansas into the Dakotas, the upper Midwest. There's a wedge of cooler air, autumn-like air for the northern plains, far northern plains up towards the Sioux. No sign of that coming southward anytime soon as the wet weather pattern continues down through Florida right into the afternoon. A slight eastward creep on some of the organized rains into the western Corn Belt locales tomorrow afternoon. And it rains again. Armageddon out in central and southern California and into the central valleys of California on northward because that tropical system still well offshore. And we're tapping into monsoon moisture and the daytime heating effect there. So weather is kind of wonky in that part of the country. Rains do shift southward into areas of Missouri. That is the northern end of some of the worst dryness and drought-related issues. And as it applies to the far southwestern Corn Belt locales, some scattered showers and thunderstorms into Oklahoma and Texas. Don't think those are going to be terribly strong or severe for outdoor work and livestock operations. Wet weather continues in through Florida. The next 48 hours, yes, some measurable rain in the gauges into California. Rains of an inch or two centered north and east of the Black Hills, another corridor west of I-35 to the Missouri and back southwest of the Great Plains. Some nice rains into central and south Florida. Except for parts of Wisconsin, nothing going on in the worst dry, drought-ridden areas of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Quite a reversal in weather when we had all the heat and all the humidity and corn sweat and all that moisture added back into the atmosphere. Now it's dry as a bone, no corn sweat issues going on whatsoever. And outside of that little renegade outbreak of moisture into northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, northern Indiana, it's been about 2.5 to 3 weeks since we've seen any organized rains into the eastern Corn Belt locale. Severe weather focused probably tomorrow afternoon, not this afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, into the Oklahoma Panhandle, the High Plains areas of Colorado, and into New Mexico. So going forward here, over the next few days, we've got that slow-moving weather system, and most of the energy is going to get strung out, stretched out, and then lift northward into southern Canada and the western Great Lakes region. There should be no significant eastward progression on that. So our radio reports, at least our pals down there in Radio Land and Illinois and Indiana, combines are rolling, making headway out there. And again, some of the bean numbers are not going to be all that fantastic into parts of the southern Corn Belt. An inch or two expected on the rain gauges west of the Mississippi. We may see a stray shower or two get going over the weekend into those eastern drought-ridden areas of the Corn Belt, but nothing of significant scale or magnitude. Wet weather continues central and south Florida, tropical moisture into California for the western states and parts of the southwestern reaches of the country as well. And just a very warm, uncharacteristically so, weather pattern for the waning days of astronomical summertime. Will welcome in fall Monday, 1:19 in that central time zone. There is the Atlantic Basin, and there's Gabriel, newly formed tropical storm on this Wednesday morning. There's a track to the west-northwest. We'll show that in just a second. And on its heels, another little disturbance a little farther south off the African coast. Looks like Gabriel will ultimately run into wind shear, strengthening winds out of the southwest to pull off once you get west of Bermuda. Probably could get absorbed with a couple of frontal boundaries, and I think all that's going to be here, and this is about 7 days out. We may see the rains begin to pick up over the mid-Atlantic, maybe as far west as the Tennessee Valley, and then southward into Florida. At least that's the thinking here in the weather office. And here is the track on Gabriel and kind of meandering its way, and we're really not anywhere near Bermuda not until the early part of next week on Monday. So slow moving. Winds are going to get progressively stronger in the western Atlantic, and I don't think we'll have much more than maybe a low-grade tropical storm weakening to a depression going forward the next 5 to 7 days in that particular part of the Atlantic story. And then the one off the African coast is moving due west, probably ultimately 2 weeks out, maybe 10 days to 2 weeks out, get into the far southwest Atlantic, maybe the Caribbean, and maybe increases rainfall chances in that particular part of the country. I don't see this being a big deal. Could get named, but not going to be anything of scale or magnitude from a storm that has to be watched and monitored for North America. And not only do we have Mario, that cloud mass up a little south of San Diego, the northern end of Baja, but farther south and not too far off some of those resort areas that had a walloping of rain 2 weeks ago. On the Pacific side in Mexico, we've got another system that's going to do the same thing and probably make a run to northward into western Mexico, Baja, and probably continue to throw tropical moisture northward into the southwestern parts of the country going forward here in the next few days. And there is the track on that system again over the next 5 to 7, a west-northwest movement. So it goes in a so-called El Nino setup. When the tropical basin, the Pacific basin, ought to be winding down, it's ramping up. And in an El Nino year, you should be getting something, going in the open waters of the Atlantic. And things are pretty quiet. So that tells us we're not really quite into a neutral atmosphere, at least from a sensible weather standpoint across the northern hemisphere. Going forward, the next 5 to 7 days, the upper air, pretty benign. You can see a low off of California. That's that tropical mess. So increased rainfall chances northward into the Sacramento Valley, San Francisco. And then you see a little tightening of the ribbon of air through western Canada that rides northward and it sinks on southward. We may spin up a weak weather system that, again, introduces maybe a stray shower into the eastern Corn Belt and a slight cool off in temperature readings. But that ridge, if you will, the H, is hot air. And once we get that system out of the Great Lakes region, probably mid to late next week, it begins to build on northward. You'll see that reflected in our 4-week forecast on this weekend's edition of This Weekend Agribusiness. But the charts here as well continue to bow to a warm to hot by fall standards, dry setup early and often on harvest operations, a little delayed with some of the rain in the western Corn Belt, but we're still well ahead of the game on any averages you want to take a look at. So that's the upper air perspective. Of course, we take a look at this because it drives the weather systems across the country. You don't see any big intrusion of cold air on the move. You get weak systems that take their time moving on through. There's no direct path to getting Gulf moisture up here. And so it goes. The story continues on. Basically, what we have experienced here much of the middle to late summertime season, quiet and uneventful and dry too. And there is the Saturday to Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday, a couple of weak boundaries, fronts through the northern plains, Great Lakes region. They don't have a lot of moisture to work with. Some degree of anything organized in the moisture departments back into the northern plains, uppermost Midwest, and away from those fronts. You've got one stalled out down through Florida. And I suspect that one or two of those tropical systems off the Atlantic, once they get sheared apart, will at least be a moisture maker for that part of the country. No sign of that making its way into the heart of the Corn Belt, nor much of the Plain States areas. Outside of the Dakotas on westward going forward, it's back into a drier pattern for folks still trying to get those winter wheat fields planted from Kansas on southward, or getting maybe prepped and ready to go with the fall and winter season in mind with livestock operations. There's the rain forecast the next 7 days. And again, focused across the Dakotas, parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, the western Corn Belt. Might be a little bit overdone in some of these areas of eastern Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. This is just a raw model data here, just for discussion purposes, but would tend to agree with some pretty good welcome rains. And if you're getting it ramped up in harvest mode, a little brief delay, but we'll get back at it here more times than not into the western Corn Belt. Welcome rains for the winter wheat fields, some muddier feedlots, but an easing of temperatures out of the southern plains, and the rain, as mentioned, across California from their tropical weather systems. Here are temperatures moving on through this afternoon. You can see 80s, a crack at some 90-degree air. That's almost 15 degrees above average, but that'll help you with late season crop maturity, moisture reduction, dry down, evaporative losses. More work for Mother Nature, but less work and, I guess, expense you got to put in over the drying facility. So just kind of let Mother Nature do her thing. You can see the cool bubble of air across the northern and central plains because of shower activity and cloud cover. By the time we get to Friday, still 80s to even some low 90s for some of those high school and college football games going into the weekend. The temperatures begin to recover back across the plains, but more so out through Big Sky Country and the Divide. There's another bubble of warm high pressure, and once we get the system out at some point early next week, that warmth over the western part of the country and the Rockies spills into the plains, spills into the Corn Belt. So it's another repeat of another significant warm spell of weather as we get ready to welcome in not only autumn, but the new month of October. And there we go into early next week with temperatures still running 10, almost 15 degrees above average over a wide area of a livestock country, spring grain belt, the corn belt, a little bit of cooling with maybe a couple of showers into the Oklahoma and Texas region. So, Sarah, that's pretty much the way it goes for now on the short term of it all. And we'll take a look at drought-related issues. And boy, they have been expanding. You know, it's the old juggling act every year. You got to get harvest going. You want to get it in. There's a lot of, I guess, storage issues already mounting with the lack of, grains being purchased and grain elevators are filled up already, and all that kind of market related stuff. But we'll take a look at the drought monitor here, and that's where we were at last month here across the plains and Corn Belt. Pretty much quiet on the drought scene.
Well, and Greg, let's have folks, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post those there in the chat or in your social media feed. I know I was out in Nebraska last week. It was still, the corn was still a little high moisture to be chopping, and the cattlemen were doing it, but they were kind of hoping it would dry down. So it sounds like we might have some of that in the works. And of course, drought helps that, but we don't like to see that. So go ahead and take it away here.
Okay. And so last month when we got together here in our longer range outlooks, that was the drought monitor. Pretty anemic, a couple of drier patches into parts of Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, expanding, but no big issues down through the Delta. And we were in relatively good shape across much of the Plain States areas. The only ongoing big issues were the Rio Grande Valley across the southwest of the divide and of the Pacific Northwest. Fast forward to September 9th, last week's, and you can see, boy, a rapid deterioration in a month's time. And 85 to 95 degree heat, low afternoon humidity, low dew points will do that to you. We haven't had much of the way of wind either. This is just the sun baking these grounds. And boy, when it is dry and drought ridden, those temperatures, no matter the time, whatever the time of year, can move along and heat up pretty quickly. But moderate and severe Ozarks to the south tip of Illinois, the southern reaches of the Ohio, and then you pick up the Mississippi on southward into the mid-south. Through Arkansas and Mississippi, and again back east-northeast across a good part of the southern through eastern Corn Belt, moderate to severe dryness and drought. We've had some improvement in Michigan. We're in great shape across Wisconsin, the upper Midwest. Some worsening as you get out to the Nebraska Panhandle, pockets across livestock country, but no big deal there otherwise. And so across the western states, we continue on pretty much steady as she goes in the dryness and drought related issues there. And you can see the Northeast and New England as well, and what has been a very dry summertime season in that particular part of the country. A little more localized as it applies to the Midwest here, central and southern Illinois, much of Missouri, and points on to the east. You can see those categories of moderate and some spots locally severe with dryness and drought in mind. And no wonder some of the bean numbers are going to be taking a hit, along with pasture lands and rangelands as you go south into the Ohio Valley and points on southward. Most everyone else through the Western Lakes, upper Mississippi Valley, in very good shape. So before we get into our outlook, we'll take a look at how the feds are going to be portraying it. And there's really no big change and deviation. There's no big disagreement. Things are pretty straightforward. No big curveballs. We still think it's still more or less a weather pattern around here that features some El Nino tendencies. El Nino can be a little tough to pick up and monitor in the summertime, but it does have a history in some years of portraying a drier weather pattern, a more drought-ridden one. So that's the thinking going forward. For the next 6 to 10 days, it takes us through the waning days of September here, and a little bend and buckle down through the southeastern states. You would just, for our discussion purposes, that line that you see out of the northern Gulf across Florida, western Atlantic, that's just basically, for our discussion here, a pickup of winds up aloft. So anything that does get steered from the tropics moves into the Atlantic. Now, north and west of those storm tracks, a lot of times you build up high pressure, sinking air, compress the gas, you warm it up. That's a lot of the reason why we have this warm air, these warm days over many plains and now Corn Belt locales, despite just like a lackadaisical wind out of the east or northeast. That's compressional warming. You don't have the big draw of a south wind off the Gulf. And so it's a different warm up, a different horse. But every time you try to get something out of the Atlantic, you'll strengthen up that ridge up aloft. It's evident in the southwest, the central, and southern plains with a little arcing line of air, and then a little bend in the jet stream across the eastern Pacific, Gulf of Alaska, rides into Canada, drops on southward, and there's more warming off the Canadian Rockies there too. And so no real significant source outside of the southeast and the Pacific Northwest to get anything really going in the moisture department. And we don't have any difference whatsoever on this. The warm days continue on. It's pretty amazing, though. You can get readings, and we've had that in parts of Illinois and Indiana, Missouri as well. Matter of fact, they were 100 degrees over the weekend just outside of Kansas City, and they had overnight lows down into the 50s. What's the math there? 40 or 50 degree temperature swing. You get that this time of the year, and there's what we call these diurnal swings of temperature between hot weather by day, the dry air, dry grounds, light winds, longer nights. You're able to cool pretty quickly at night. We saw readings in some spots this morning that were up near 90 yesterday, into the upper 40s this morning into parts of Illinois and western Indiana. Anyway, 6 to 10 day outlook for there. And that's pretty much the bullseye story. The western states, Gulf Coast, think there might be something of a little tropical nature that might be a little overdone all the way to the Ohio. But wet weather for Texas, the Gulf Coast, and through Florida, warm high pressure ridging up aloft. So enjoy those rains while you may. In the western Corn Belt locales, the upper Midwest, northern and central plains, they, by all intents and purposes, are going to be coming to a screeching halt. Run it out 2 weeks, no real change. Jet stream winds are strengthening a little bit and dipping a little farther south. So some wetter weather and moisture recharge and drought relief for the Pacific Northwest. Good news there. And across the rest of the country, enjoy a late to September, early to mid-October feel that feels more or less like late July or August. I guess we'll put it in that context, minus the real high humidity and oppressiveness of things. So we get the rains out of the way. It's back to moisture reduction, dry down, and evaporative losses, and those combines ought to be going full tilt. This might be a little optimistic in a return to near normal moisture for Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. I would like to see that, and I think it's portrayed in our outlook here of a drier scenario with the Pacific Northwest, yes, and a couple of diffuse, meandering, what were tropical things out of the Gulf or the southwestern Atlantic working into cotton country, maybe some early harvest delays there, but again, focused on some of the drought areas, the lower Mississippi Valley and Delta region. So, Sarah, that's the thinking for the rest of summertime. And of course, you know what happens on the, let's see, that will be the 22nd of September, the equinox. What do?
Oh, yeah, that egg thing, right?
No, well, you let it in. Remember,
balance that egg.
Equinox. Now, no, yeah, you shake up a can of soda, and that's right. You open the pop top, and it doesn't come spraying out, right? Carbonation.
Right.
Yeah,
So, time for autumn, time for fall here.
Yep.
The leaves changing, even though the temperatures are awesome. So,
Yeah.
what can we expect? Are we going to continue to see some warm temps going into the fall season?
Yeah, exactly. Now, a lot of the trees as well are going to be turning or already turning colors because of some of the stress-related issues. And at least in my part of the world, they're already beginning to turn and drop leaves, especially some of the maple varieties out there. And we put a question mark by the neutral state because at this point, we're not completely buying into it. It has a look and feel of El Nino, and here we go for the rest of September around here and getting into October. Above average warmth there. Very little change in the thinking around here that we continue with a return to drier weather. The storm track is through the northwestern reaches of the country, Canadian border. And if we get a couple of tropical systems, yeah, through the southeastern states, but hardly anything organized to write home about in the moisture department. Going forward into October, it's a neutral state? Maybe. Neutral state meaning that temperatures in the equatorial Pacific have returned to normal. Don't see that happening anytime soon. So a lot of the time we're above average to much above average. We get a couple of little slivers of cool air, particularly if a tropical system moves up across the western and northern Atlantic. And here's your additional opportunity for a fast and rapid early and often harvest. Again, some of the numbers might be disappointing on yields because of the late season drought. And if there's anything organized in the tropical department, it impacts the eastern states. And I don't see that being a big deal. I think this is going to be a busted hurricane forecast as it applies to the Atlantic Basin. November, you might be cooking with the windows open for Thanksgiving. We think by then we're back to equatorial equilibrium and water temperatures of the Pacific and all the other indices across the Atlantic and the polar regions. And there is a return to at least a little more moisture. And by then we will have needed it. So like we've been telling you folks before, and not trying to tell you how to do your job, but try to get it done certainly by the beginning part of November to no later than Thanksgiving. I think delays begin to set forth on what will be primarily liquid form moisture for a good part of the heartland and the Plain States areas too. On to rough draft number 2 here, Sarah, for the winter season. And again, we've gone over these maps and charts each and every week for the TV show, and sat down. There's just no reason to change anything going forward. So if you think this looks familiar from when we got together in August, yeah, it is. Betting that will finally, probably by January, February, will have shifted into more or less a weather pattern that features kind of a La Nina setup. And when that happens in winter times, things get a little more character building. But cold air is on the move. The western and plain states areas are still above average. The normal precip is just that across the northern and eastern Corn Belt locales. Still some dryness issues into the plains and western reaches of the country. That's okay with livestock operations. January, and I think it's the holidays, we're literally going to throw a switch within a week to 10-day time frame. And here comes the cold air on southward. It's a week long heat getting going around here. And this moisture machine takes on more or less. And this sometimes, from a livestock, actually, at least a landscape standpoint, sometimes when you get these cold air intrusions and there's no cold air hardening process, you get a lot of winter kill, at least according to my landscape buddies out there. But there's January, there's February, and there's February's precip pattern as well, with severe weathers you'd expect across the Delta and the Gulf Coast areas. No shortage of moisture coming back into play. So it may try to ramp up in a hurry within a few weeks' time, Sarah, where we get a very active and moisture-laden weather pattern going, hopefully getting that moisture in the ground before we begin to firm it up and freeze it up and put snow and ice on top of that. But I think the harvest season and probably a little beyond ought to be clear sailing, and then hold on good and tight for no shortage of moisture as we begin to ramp things up towards the holidays. It looks like the new year and beyond from there.
Very good. One last push. If anybody has any questions, now is the time to get those in there. So it looks like, we're getting into winter here, but we got a few more months. And of course, you and I will be touching base in between there to get all of you an update every couple times a week here with our midweek updates, and then our monthly updates, and every weekend on This Week in Agribusiness. So lots of opportunities to
radio stations
and all the radio. Yep. All the radio stations.
You can't get rid of
lots of ways. Lots of ways to keep updated and have Greg keep you updated. So, all right, Greg, thank you so much for joining us here today, and we'll touch base with you a little later this week for a midweek update.
Take care.
Thank you all for joining us as well. If you'd like to watch this or share this, you can go to Feedstuffs 365 and feel free to do whatever you like with that. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.